So what occurs when the U.S. arrives is not just that there's an occupation of the country with the typical brutality that such occupations involve. There's an occupation of the economy which has catastrophic effects on Iraq. The shuttering of the national industries, of the nationally owned industries, involves an immediate paralysis of 35% of the economy. But it's much worse than that. It's much worse than 35% of the economy, because the government enterprises were central to all other enterprises. A good example of this is the leather industry, which was an export industry in Iraq, quite thriving. But the entire leather industry relied on the tanning industry that was government owned. When that was shut down, the leather industry itself was shut down, and within 6 months it declined from 200,000 employees to 20,000 employees. To give you an idea of the multiplier effect, there were about 30,000 employees employed by the government, and the rest were all privately employed in dependent firms like shoemaking and shoe-selling enterprises, leather goods of various sorts, and so on and so forth. You have the same thing in agriculture. The U.S. government shut down the pesticide spraying service that the government had maintained. And this meant that all manner of crops were subject to pesticides. Perhaps the most disastrous of this was the palm trees, the date palms, which was another export industry. They were infested, and they take 15 years to regrow, so we're 15 years away from a viable date farm industry in Iraq as a result of the American policies. Now, in this situation, what happens is you generate resistance everywhere. You have places like the town of Baiji, in which was a thriving industrial town surrounding the oil facilities there. The oil facilities were not shut down. The other facilities were, created massive unemployment, huge protests. The U.S. sent troops in to suppress these protests, and this generated a huge insurgency in Baiji, which remained one of the centers of the insurgency for the next 5 years. Similarly in Fallujah, it was the economic collapse in Fallujah that really was underlying the rebellion there and on around the country, so that what you have is a rebellion of people against not only the presence of the Americans and the brutality of the American military, but also the economic fallout of American economic policies, so that people couldn't support their families and lost their jobs and couldn't find new jobs and a variety of other things. And as these various economic deprivations take hold, more and more people are protesting, demanding some change that will allow them to support their families. Perhaps the most poignant of this is that the Saddam Hussein regime had instituted a food basket, a basic food basket to which all families were entitled, that could, at a very meager level, sustain human life. Part of the American program was to cut that food basket, and so that they were actually faced in a situation where people lost jobs, had no other means of sustenance, were used to the food basket, and now were being told that they were no longer eligible for it, or that the food basket they were eligible for was much more meager than the previously already very scarce one. So this created tremendous amounts of anger, especially in the places where people were most displaced, because the method by which they were deprived of the food basket was said that if you moved, you had to register in Baghdad in order to remain eligible for the food basket. So people who were displaced by these various upheavals, economic or political or military, were the very people who were most deprived. So all this creates a situation in which people become more and more angry and rebellious. And they have no problem seeing that it's the American presence which is actually the source of their difficulty. And so therefore the anger is directed at the Americans, and then made all the more angry when the Americans become the suppressing force that come in to stop the rebellion. So the rebellion is a general rebellion. It exists everywhere except in the Kurdish areas. And even in the Kurdish areas, as time has gone on, the number of people in the Kurdish areas who are anxious for the Americans to leave keeps increasing, because they see such slow progress in their own areas because of the whole impact of the U.S. presence, that they more and more are looking at the Americans as a source of their own problems. So that this is the origins of the rebellion. But perhaps even more significant than this, it's the origins of an absolutely continuous set of rebellions that can never end as long as the U.S. is there.
تسألني عنك شردة جاء